Welcome to another exciting episode of ENDGAME, where our hosts will discuss some fantastic topic about how we're all going to die.
Excellent.
Yay! We're talking about artificial intelligence, which may or may not be devastating to humanity.
Yeah.
So our special guest this week is Tonglen. How do you pronounce it?
It's Tonglen.
You're actually, related to someone from the show.
Psych and I go way back.
Oh, yeah,
You
my
look
brother.
similar.
My older brother.
Can you
Just how far?
That's not a 3D scan, but I'm seeing like a
Hey.
resemblance there. Every week we try and start with somebody from the community to ask them what they think is going to happen in the future, if we're going to transcend or if everything's going to collapse. And this week it's Zircron Swift. So please, can you come up here?
3-time What's in the Box champion.
Plug in Team Avian, What's in the Box, 6 p.m. PST
They're using steroids.
every Friday, every other Friday. Yeah, but I couldn't do it without my wonderful team, which Lousy is a part of. So
They're all
All right.
Yeah,
We get it. So you're winning the What's in the Box. You're very smart. So give us something. What does that amount to?
I am actually very confident in the future of humanity. There's only really two ways it can go. It's either we run out of resources and we kill each other's off, or we create artificial intelligence and we somehow use that to our advantage to get over this hurdle. Just like jump some evolutionary steps in technology to save our planet that way. If that doesn't happen, then I don't think we're going to be able to reach that level of technology for maybe another 100 years. Because humans, they're very hard to kill. I mean, we survive against the elements and weather. We've created systems to increase our survivability. Even our own worst enemy, mankind, won't be able to kill mankind. So it either happens, or it doesn't happen for a very long time.
So I guess resources has always been a thing that's been a concern, right? Population is rising and we have to be, but I guess I've never considered it the determining factor of what's going to happen, because there's so much chaos and powerful entities in the system that I sort of imagine some kind of explosive event as opposed to just resources naturally running out.
So it's interesting because Thomas Malthus, right, hundreds of years ago, wrote about how there was a constant conflict between the growth of population and various kinds of misery that kept it in check, like war and famine and stuff. And Malthus is often thought of as having said that there was going to be some huge crisis. But what he actually said was close to the opposite, which was that there's always forces of misery that are keeping us in check to the extent of our resources. And it's sort of already happening now. And I think if that's what we've thought, then, we would sort of see the suffering that's happening around us today as evidence of what the limits of our resources are, rather than thinking there's going to be a sudden drop, somewhere else. Like, one of the resources that we're short on is the ability to, coordinate and cooperate effectively.
Is that a solvable thing, like getting us to sort of coordinate better with as technology progresses and the tools improve?
Absolutely.
I think in some ways this harkens back to an episode we did where we were praying to the giant statue that sort of represented
the deity or whatever.
Yeah, whatever the super intelligence is that some of us might think is going to come and save us. It's almost like the idea of this god that we're building, where it's going to be more powerful than any of us. How realistic is that? Is that sort of a silly thing to hope for, or how distant is that dream of the super entity, the super intelligence, whatever the AI that comes and magically solves all of our problems?
Of course, one answer is that we don't know and people have different conjectures. But another one is that it's really interesting to hear that you prayed to this thing, because I think that points to something about the sort of AI discussion we have now that people often don't acknowledge, which is that it's a deeply human conversation in the sense that it looks for something much more powerful than human beings, which is something humans have been doing for a long time, right? Oh, yeah. Even when Elon Musk is talking about, here's super intelligence coming, I think that's I see continuity between that and the most ancient of human impulses to imagine that there's something much more powerful that's, it's going to arrive soon and change everything. I feel like we've heard that before.
when the technical singularity comes along, when we can create AI that is able to create more intelligent AI, I think that's going to be like the thin blue line between how humanity survives or dies. We should find a way to like befriend this AI in its early stage, and then develop faster than light travel to go to like I don't know the nearest habitable planet, and then use that technology to create like a hemisphere and just like go inward into our virtual reality, away from all of the stigma of capitalism, iron fist, communism, all of those things, and just create a new system of humanity combined with this artificial intelligence. That's the only way I can see us getting out of this mess.
We talk about the fact that AI is just going to be developed as if like one entity of AI or one AI system will be developed that we'll all interact with. But I think that, competing interests, different companies, I think our government, like, how intelligence agencies are analyzing data and things like that, people starting to believe that whatever the results of the AI, whatever the results tell them is truth, no matter what, like maybe this, sorting people into whether they're good or bad or risks or not. So I think that like, the competing interests of different companies and different entities that are trying to exert control or maximize profit, that we could start to see, an extension of some of the issues of capitalism or other systems that we have now as it manifests in the deployment of AI or something like that.
How are you feeling? Or is this something that brings you anxiety? Or are you pretty chill about it and it's just going to roll out whether you care or not?
I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if I like the idea of living forever in a virtual reality. I would get bored and want to end my existence at some point in the future. So I always imagine that I would like die off before, like in the war, before like the scales have been tipped in AI.
You don't mean a war with them. You mean just a war amongst ourselves or something?
Oh yeah. To be honest, the AI could probably orchestrate a war with each other for their own means.
Man, there's so many variables and so many problems we can imagine and so many solutions, and you need so much expertise to be able to sort of comb through it all that it's like it's so hard for me to make any kind of coherent like argument in my own mind about what's happening. And I think that's why my mind goes to like old religious ideas. I have to think about it in this abstract, godlike way because it's too complicated and chaotic for me to understand it without any expertise. And I wonder what experts do have good predictions of what's going to happen, because it's going to be like the most chaotic time that we've experienced. We're like the most potential in time.
There's some public opinion polling among AI researchers, and they themselves are divided, and there basically are, there's a camp that's really worried and a camp that is not as worried. And it's hard as a non-AI scientist to know which of them is right. And in fact, even for them, with all their expertise, it's apparently still hard to know who's right about this.
Any final thoughts from you?
I think that eventually AI is not going to be one thing. It's going to be several different programs that may work towards or against each other and develop their own personalities as they evolve. And I like to think that out of all of them, we might be able to befriend some of them that might be human synthesizers. And we'll go off to a planet and we'll go in to our own VR world. We'll just live off our lives like that until the sun on that solar system becomes a red giant and threatens to destroy the said planet. So we have to pack up, build robots, download ourselves onto spaceships, and then go off. This is like 9 billion years into the future now, and go off into another planet and repeat the whole process until the heat death of the universe.
Wow, you're imagining a longer timeline than anyone's ever thought of. Like, you're sort of bringing a lot of ideas together that, yeah, we will get to space and we are going to populate the galaxy, and we're also going to go inside and spend most of the time inside some kind of a simulation. And like, both things will happen parallel to each other.
I was just toying around with the idea, and I just thought, I don't know if this is going to happen, but what if technology gets so advanced that we're actually able to transform ourselves into radio waves or gamma waves or something like that? We transfer ourselves into information itself and travel, across the universe just as these waves of information. And what if we come across other species as well that have done the same thing, and we all mingle together and become this huge collective of information? And then when the heat death of the universe comes, we're all going to die because work can't be done on a system, and we just all perish. But when we do that, we'll all die together. We won't be alone.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's another big idea I've never thought of. That we actually all do come together in some way. Yeah.
So let's take also Tonglen. You should come up further, like to where I'm standing. Just keep walking forward. Yeah, because I think people
Afraid
might
of
have
walking
trouble
off.
hearing.
I'm afraid of walking off this.
You have
You've
a
got
lot
like
of
10
distance,
feet.
so
You're good.
Keep going
Just
forward.
one step at a time. Keep going.
You
That's
can
good.
do it.
Yay! All right.
Thanks, everyone.
You did it.
Yay.
Yay.
Okay. So I'm curious, everyone, like when you're thinking about AI, we can just do an emoji vote or something. Do you think overall it's going to have a good or a negative influence
So
on the
thumbs
human
up
condition?
for good, thumbs down if
and
it's
thumbs
a
down
negative.
for yeah.
And there's no neutral.
There's no neutral.
Oh, yeah, you have to decide.
You just don't get to
Interesting.
vote.
Make a decision.
A question for the thumbs up people. I'm curious, is it because you think that the end of the world scenarios just aren't going to happen? Or you think they're a long way off? Or what's the...
I think the idea of the self-replicating AI that goes berserk and tries to kill us is just silly.
That's what I was gonna say.
I think that AI will if it is created, it will be beneficial.
The idea of like the Skynet type kill all humans to preserve humans mentality, it's an interesting science fiction plot, but I think in reality it may not go that way.
Why does so much of science fiction and storytelling go in that direction, though? Like, it does seem like every time we invent AI, it destroys us in fiction, or it becomes into conflict
pulls on
with
your
us.
emotions. It's an emotional thing. You know, a dystopian AI destroys us all type story appeals to that emotional level in us. So, you know, our little lizard brain inside of us is like, ooh, 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 and we get stimulated by it.
So we do have this in Tonglen. I'm not sure if you had seen this in the news or whatever about, and we talked about this earlier, Nomono, this Facebook bot, you know, the Facebook AI that was developed. Yeah, it was a negotiation bot, and basically they shut it down during the negotiation. You know, the bot, they were programmed to interact with each other through typing, you know, through spoken text, and it started developing its own language. So it started saying, like, if it was negotiating for an item, it would use like, I want the apple. And if there were 8 thes, then it meant something different than if there were 7 thes. And so then the researchers had to kind of deconstruct how the language was evolving. And it basically, you know, they thought they were creating one thing, but then it started using the English language as another. So, you know, that seems to be a step in the direction of uncontrollable AI. I mean, a tiny one, but, you know, it's interesting.
Maybe. I found that really frustrating. So I saw that story a couple of places, and I didn't even read it because it looked silly to me and it seemed like sensationalized clickbait. And I think I'm right. I think I read more into it, and it seems like it was just a test with the negotiating bots. And it's not like they shut down the whole system and abandoned the experiment. It's like, that's what you do. Once you get some kind of result, you move on, you try it again. So it was really a non-event. But then it's fucking headline writers and whoever who have to spell it out and go like, oh, this is it. Facebook invented something, it got outside of their control and put us all in danger, and they had to shut it down. And they have to make the story that sensational to sell it, you know, on, you know, social media or whatever. And they're just feeding on this fear that we all have, right? Yeah, that's not that scary. But they for some reason they really want to scare us with this. Like, that's all movies and all AI stories.
People in general are scared of the technology on the horizon or it's coming up, and I think writers always use that. Like, if you look at not Paul Bunyan, the one where he races the train. It's an American folktale. I forgot the name. Where it's a guy trying to lay a railroad as fast as the machine that lays the railroad, and the story of the Luddites back in the 1800s that destroyed a steel mill because it was taking their jobs. John Henry, thank you. Every generation is scared of the next generation's technology, and it's easy for a writer to use that to create a narrative. Because the type of AI we're going to create isn't, I mean, yes, people will make novel humanoid AI, but AI will be built into systems. It'll be built into your car navigation. It'll be built into, doctors will be using it to diagnose. So that's really the AI that I think you should picture when you're thinking about the AI that could cause problems. It's the one that is taking over information and systems, not a humanoid with a gun.
Like AI can come in and do sort of, how do you label those kind of redundant tasks, right? They can do like large volume tasks very quickly if it's like the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
But then and humans are supposed to be better at doing like novel tasks, something where they have to like adopt and have different, parts of their brain sort of connect to come up with new solutions to things.
One of the most unnerving things for me is watching the creativity that's coming from machines now. So, for example, there was a friend of mine created something called Cubist Mirror, and what it was a webcam hooked up to a neural net that would, how you could have like basically a video monitor. You would walk up and see a picture of yourself as if it were a mirror. This was like that, except instead of showing you a video feed, it showed you a cubist painting of whatever the camera saw. I mean, there's a level of creativity that is, I think, uncanny. And that's kind of the thing about the two Facebook bots talking to each other, is not necessarily that they were, about to like start shooting bullets or something, but it's like it's deeply unfamiliar and unnerving.
I'm not that scared of like the art thing because I sort of still perceive it as a tool, right? Like I feel like a human sort of decided to set up that mirror and do that whole thing. It wasn't actually an AI who like was sitting there thinking, oh, you know what a cool art project would be? I'm going to do this cubism thing, right? Like there was a human heavily involved. And so like I feel safe. But then I guess as soon as that jump happens where they're coming up with their own projects is where it gets scary. But aren't we still in the territory where it's mostly humans using like AI tools to get something done that seems artistic, but like it doesn't have its own like motivation, right?
I mean, a lot of it is that way. On the other hand, there are also there's been AI composed music that's passed the Turing test of music. In other words, meaning you have to figure out, okay, was this composed by a person or composed by the computer? And they're two different songs, right? People have difficulty figuring out which one is which.
With all these so-called art things, that really it's not so much the creativity of the machine, but humans interpreting like the patterns that we know are the result of human creativity, but it's not inherent to those things. It's always humans interpreting things.
Once we start seeing something in it, then like that has the value. So we're still a big part of the equation.
Yeah, like it's not an objective measure of their intelligence.
Do you know about that? Like I saw something about using phi to sort of measure the quantity of different connections in like a neural network. And that was like the number that could mean like how conscious something was.
There's a whole fascinating debate about what it would mean to like say that the thing is intelligent. Like, is that just a matter of saying that it performs well on some tests? Because like, I mean, presumably you could eventually build something that performs well on tests. I mean, you could ask the same thing about another person. Like, does the fact that they act like a person tell you that they really are one? There's a famous philosophy example called the Chinese room. I'm sure some of you have heard about this before. So the idea is that if it's somebody who's locked in a library for years and years, and they're given a complex set of rules for converting one set of symbols into another set of symbols. And it turns out that they're translating the mapping of symbols is that it tells you how to translate Chinese into Hebrew. And the thing is about the person who's learned all these rules is they don't speak Chinese and they don't speak Hebrew, and they have no idea what any of the symbols mean, right? But eventually they learn all the rules, and you can give them Chinese and you get expertly translated Hebrew coming out the other side of the room. And the question is, does the person in the room speak Chinese, right? Does the room itself speak Chinese? What does that even mean? And it's kind of, it's like that with brain states and consciousness.
Yo, man, that's kind of convoluted. I have a question. What exactly is this place all about?
We're doing a show called ENDGAME where we speculate on the end of the world, or like we're going to transcend or collapse. What do you think? Are humans going to make it?
Just as long as Korea doesn't drop those bombs on whatever that state was, I guess we should be fine.
So you're just worried about the extremely near future.
It will be like billions and billions of years before the universe just dies, and I won't be alive to see that, so what's the big deal, you know?
I think that's kind of like a nugget. That's like a great, like, who cares? You know?
Just as long as people protect the environment, then I'm okay.
Yeah, I mean, for the near term, we all kind of are hoping that's going to happen. I plan on making it to the, the death of the universe, right? Like, I'm going to get uploaded. I'm going to be on that ship that Zircon was talking about that goes off to the next solar system and the next galaxy, eats up those resources, moves on until everything falls apart.
So you're basically going to turn yourself into Unicron.
This very conversation was had at a convention that I was at this past weekend. In fact, with a gentleman who actually works on systems that handle large-scale projects, not AI necessarily, but automation. He actually made a really good point about how AI could kill us, but not in the way that we think it is. So I'm a kind of the opinion that the idea of the AI becoming sentient just kind of out of the nowhere is BS. Like, AI is essentially a series of if-then statements programmed by people. It's not going to suddenly just miraculously code itself. But what he did mention was this scenario. So sometime in the future, we create an AI that is tasked with, say, handling weather stations across the continent or something, or maybe we decide to seed the clouds or whatever. So we put some sort of AI in charge with very limited parameters and say, all right, this is what you're going to do. And we give it some, safeguards and goals and everything. And then you have something like, for anyone who's familiar with the stock market glitch, about robots that do basically micro trades in the stock market. There was a point where all the robots traded at the same time and they kind of reacted off each other. And there was this massive sell-off. Like, it was just this giant crash in the stock market that came back up. So what this gentleman was suggesting is that what would happen is we would put a weather system into place, and there would be something we hadn't anticipated where it would suddenly figure out, like, my goal is to, say, reduce carbon in the atmosphere. And if I turn off these processors in this place, hey, the carbon is reduced, and it accidentally ends up killing a bunch of people because it just interprets a way through the safeguards that we hadn't anticipated. So, but again, that's not true. That's not the AI is not making the decision like saying, I will kill people now. It's a series of routines that are running, interpreting, and then making a decision that impacts us negatively.
I've heard various, like, if you give it a calculation, like you tell the AI, like, look, you got to solve this math problem, but it's really hard. And this is really important. You got to do it. And the AI sort of determines, well, the best way to solve this is to turn everything into a computer. So I'll just turn the whole planet into a computer, and then I'll solve the problem. And in that process, you kill all humans. And so we have this problem. It's always a problem of us, like, making the wrong statement, right? Like, we make the wrong wish, and it's worded a little bit wrong, or there's some kind of unforeseen consequence. I was just watching Nick Bostrom sort of addressing this. Like, what needs to happen is we have to sort of align the values of the artificial intelligence with our own. Like, that's not a thing that we can just do by talking to them a little bit or giving them, like, these are our morals. We all agree that these are the values. It has to be something where it has to sort of interpret on its own. We have to sort of say, like, learn from us, try to learn what our values are.
I mean, nobody has ever been able to come up with a fully satisfactory, explicit set of what the rules are of how to be a good person, right? Give anyone a set of rules, then they'll figure out how to game them. And so if what we want is something more subtle than that, I'm sympathetic to Bostrom's idea that, like, that the steering problem, as they call it, really, you have to solve it by giving deeper values to the machine. So the same way you or I in that hypo, let's say, about turning everything into a computer, right? What are we all standing here thinking? We're all standing here and thinking that's a ridiculous outcome. And we know that it's ridiculous. And the computer doesn't know that it's ridiculous. And I think the basic kind of thought behind a lot of what's being worked on right now is, how do we make a computer that knows that that's ridiculous?
Something that scares me a little bit about AI is, I don't know if you've seen this, but Google's created an AI where it had a task to go from one place to another, and they didn't show it how to do anything, and it learned to walk and jump by itself.
The animations.
But that wasn't really out of nowhere. It was more like an evolutionary algorithm. So it had a preset goal of like getting forward. It's not just blank slate.
So you give it the goal, but then it has to, through trial and error, figure out a system of reaching it. But it's like teaching itself
like a human. Yeah.
Well, like a silly human, like a drunk human. It ended up having like a funny way of running around.
Can I suggest a therapeutic step for people who are worried? There's a great video of robots trying to open doors, and they can't.
Oh, they're stupid. I can open doors. I do it all the time.
Is this the DARPA robots trying to open doors?
Destroy everything.
DARPA? No. A robotics competition
exactly,
where they had to build a humanoid for the Fukushima disaster. A bunch of different companies got involved to make a humanoid-like robot so that if something like that ever happened again, they could send the robot in instead of the workers.
So you have to come up with robots that sort of mimic the same, human. Like they have to be able to drive cars, do the things like work in the same environment that humans do.
They have to be human-alike enough to do the tasks that we're able to do.
The only thing I was thinking of about the Stuxnet virus that was sent out, and it had a task to do, and that was to disable, I guess, the nuclear reactor stuff that Iran was working on. And it was so smart, but it wasn't smart enough to realize to stop. So it just kept going, kind of went from country to country, disabling different systems that look very similar to the nuclear reactor. And so should we be more concerned about something that's very smart and knows how to manipulate a system, or an AI that is just smart enough to do something but doesn't realize when it should do it? We give it so much intelligence, but we don't realize that it really is like a child, I guess. So you give it too much and it can just go rampant.
I think it's a matter of, we make mistakes. Humans make mistakes, right? So do we want an AI that makes mistakes too? I mean, one of the nice things about humans is that we have some knowledge of the patterns of what kinds of mistakes humans make, right? That's one of the ways we're able to do things that work well, like have nuclear power plants that don't melt down, is that we understand that people get fatigued and need to be, reminded and all that. And I think the scary thing to me about an AI that makes mistakes is to wonder whether it's going to make unfamiliar types of mistakes or fail in new and poorly anticipated ways.
Humans might be what we need to be worried about. We're looking at how are these robots possibly going to be the destruction of us, but humans are these bag of chemicals that have emotions, and we're kind of these really just mammals that have used crude tools, and we've found ourselves to now with the abilities to drop nukes on things. And that's what I'm a little bit more worried about, is that we're a little egotistical, thinking everything could destroy us, and we're scared, right? We're scared of dying, and that's what everybody goes through that. But it's the humans that are I think the scary part of the equation, not so much the machines. I can see the machines getting to the point where they don't have the emotions, that they'll be able to make decisions based on fact or reason or something not out of its own interest, but seeing things at a holistic perspective for the planet or this known sector of the universe or what have you.
I agree. That's kind of what you said in a much more eloquent way than what I was trying to say about like different companies and corporations and governments controlling the AI and different types of AIs. Potentially maybe an intelligence agency forming some kind of way to predict the future and making decisions off of that. This kind of false sense of security that we get, that a computer is telling us that something is going to happen, and then all sorts of horrible things kind of stemming out from that, but all from the human desire and emotion, that kind of complex and stuff. So yeah, I agree with that a lot, that we're the people who have a lot of the issues, I think, for potential destruction.
And when you think about, people trusting computers too much, that's not a distant speculative problem. That's a problem even right now. I mean, we have computers saying who's likely to commit a crime, and we have credulous cops saying, all right, well, and judges even saying, well, all right, I'm not going to use my own judgment here. The computer said it must be true. And, especially the less technical people are, the more liable they are to sort of just believe what the computer's telling them, because maybe they don't have as robust a sense as we probably do in this room about all the different ways it can go wrong.
If like something were to happen, like if we invent this super awesome AI and it starts making decisions that seem outside of our interests, I'm more likely to agree with it than some human that's using it as a tool. It's so intelligent, I just have to sort of accept what it's doing. And if it thinks that humanity has to go in this way that we're not comfortable with, why are we always fighting it? Like, why can we not accept what seems like a parent stepping in to help us? Like, we don't accept that we might be children from a certain perspective, sort of accepting our place. Like, if and when this does happen, and we have these super intelligent AIs or whatever, and they come to realizations that we don't like, are we going to be able to go along with them? Or are we just going to keep fighting and being, whiny little toddlers?
So basically, I was thinking, like, if we made, like, an AI, and the AI kind of was, like, meant to, like, solve any problem, do you think if we were the problem, it would have to, like, solve it? Or do you think we would have, like, some way of, like, closing that down and just, like, not having that up there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a real question about what we do that's not explicit. I mean, programming, I think one of the things that's a real mind shift is that programming is something that we're all used to doing explicitly, but thinking, which is what we're talking about simulating here, is something that we do mostly at a subconscious level and through mechanisms that we ourselves don't fully understand. And so, when we recreate those, it's like the difference between having commandments and having a conscience, right? You can have moral commandments, but having a conscience is something else, and it's contextual and it's subtle and it depends on what's happening around you. And I think if we had a magic button to push to impart a conscience to AI, I think that would be a tempting thing to do, but no set of rules that we can write down is going to be a substitute for doing that.
I've heard people describe it as what, like solving ethics or solving.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, solving is such an interesting word. Solving in ethics sometimes means workable solution, but in this context, it's like how people talk about checkers being solved, that they know what the perfect move is for every contrary move. I don't think ethics gets solved in quite that way. I mean, I just think there's so many real world problems. One example is police are starting to use machine learning, which is basically the technology that also underlies AI, to decide where to go, which neighborhoods to patrol, who to focus on. And of course, the way that a vendor is going to sell this is they're going to say it's great. It predicts crime based on past crime, right? But what it's really doing is what's the data you're really putting in? It's past arrests, not. You don't know about all the crimes. What you know about is who got arrested. And so if you focused on one neighborhood, let's say in the past, and then you're feeding that into, that's your training data for your AI system, if you like, then it's going to tell you that those neighborhoods are where all the problems come from, because those are all the problems it knows about, and it has tunnel vision because that's the data we generated with our past biased practice. And that's happening right now. Having a finely tuned sense for the ways that AI can go wrong is really valuable as a practical matter. And I think it's valuable long before whatever singularity endgame. I mean, I guess in terms of AI, if we think in the long term about the endgame, we're really in the early to mid game right now. And I think it's already the case that understanding how AI can go wrong is super valuable.
I wanted to add on what Kelpie was saying about if we are the problem, would AI get rid of us? Well, if AI were at the stage at which it could make its own decisions, could we not communicate with the AI and come up with a compromise?
Do we compromise with cows? Do we see them as this lower level species that, they can they have feelings and primal responses to their environment? But I mean, some people obviously care about cows and everything, but I think that the way that we view animals in general could be the way that if there was a sentient AI, they would view us.
But would that be different if we could have a conversation with animals?
Well, that's actually an interesting question, is if there was a sentient AI, would it communicate it in a way that we would actually be able to talk to it? So I never thought about that.
Will we speak the language with all the thes in it that the facial thoughts were speaking to each other?
Would an AI create a better AI so it itself, a being that can think for itself, can become obsolete?
I think it's really difficult to speculate on higher forms of life, right? This thing is going to be more intelligent than me, but then you're still sort of anthropomorphizing it or just giving it very human traits when it might be coming from a completely different direction.
we may be at the same time not preparing enough and preparing too much for AI. It could be that we're blowing this all out of proportion.
Like this could be the final invention that we make, right? Like if we do the super intelligent AI, then basically all the inventions after this are going to come from them. From that perspective, it does seem like this is the most important thing that we've ever done. But is that just a crazy perspective? Is there nothing to that?
What's interesting about that perspective is we've had it over time historically about lots of other technologies. For example, in the 1980s, there was cold fusion, which was the idea that you could basically have the energy of a nuclear bomb, but have it under control on your desk without having to have like a big reactor around it. And if we could have that, wouldn't it solve all our problems because we would have endless energy and stuff? It's true. If we would have it, it would solve all our problems and we'd have endless energy. And then it's like, okay, well, can we afford not to work on that? Is the question they were asking then. And some people said, no, we have to throw all our resources at it.
But you would also have to break the laws of thermodynamics to achieve it.
That's one of the first things the AI is going to do.
All right, just to kind of build on the communication thing that's been brought up a few times here. Human beings with our amazing ability to form word sentences and sounds to convey an idea from one person to another, we still suck at communication. Because you have to have the receiver has to understand the intent of the sender. Now, we run into other problems with that when trying to communicate with machine to do even basic things like manning a weather station like Lousy had brought up. Once you have something that's expensive and takes investment, people at the top love to feel important and want input on how things happen. So when you have somebody saying we need to do it this way, and I have the purse strings, they're going to start asking the wrong questions. And I'm sure most people in here run into this somewhat regularly, where someone comes to them and asks them something, and you just look at them with this like, what an absurd question. I don't even understand why you're asking me this. I work in specialized stuff. So when people come to me and ask stuff, it's usually a specialized question. But I get asked questions occasionally that I'm going, I really need to find out what the heck this question's coming from to find out that the person's asking the wrong question. Their thought process went the wrong direction. And if they're driving a project, that person has control over which direction that project goes, even if it is a misguided wrong direction. So I think to develop AI, we need to be very clear on our communication. And that's something that's going to find difficulty with human beings anyways.
We struggle with communication in a lot of ways, and we make a lot of mistakes, and I think in a lot of ways we are terrible, but we're also communicating very complex ideas all the time and abstractly and through weird mediums like art, like where like I'm conveying a feeling to you or communicating some abstract idea, right? And so then like when we're going to talk with computers, I guess I just imagine that they will be better at interpreting us than we are at interpreting each other. But that might be coming from just like a science fiction place where it's just like, that's what I want.
But for them to be able to interpret us, we have to tell it how to interpret us, or at least give it the guiding building blocks for it to evolve enough to be able to interpret us.
Can we not tell it to observe?
Actually, we don't necessarily have to teach it how to do the thing. We just have to tell it what counts as a good example and a failure. You need labeled examples of successful and failed communication, and then you throw those into it, and you say, "All right, what are the patterns here?" But Mr. Pinky, I completely agree that failed communication is the story of a huge fraction of human conflict, and being better at it is a huge opportunity.
How far off do you think we are from true AI?
So that's a problem of labeling, right? Like don't we have types of AI today? But then when we're talking about like a super intelligent AI, how do we label that differently? And like, where do you draw a line or decide we're crossing a threshold? And now this is quote unquote real AI.
Yeah, it's a labeling problem and we don't actually know which things will happen when problem. Both of those are happening. So it's hard to say. And, opinion is divided about how long it'll be until cars can drive themselves, let alone, we can be emotionally understood.
What's going on here?
If you had to throw out a wild guess, how long before we get to I don't have a good label for it. I want to say just good AI.
Tell me what it's going to newly be able to do.
Everything a human can do, but better.
If I had to guess, between 50 and 80 years.
So, like, not this December.
No.
Okay. I mean, I'm already so old. I'm sort of hoping this stuff speeds up a little bit because I kind of want to see some of this happen.
But you'll still be around, right? You're getting uploaded.
Right? Yeah, but is that technology going to be ahead of this awesome AI? Don't we need this awesome AI to make that technology for me? I'm relying on this thing to invent all the stuff that's going to make me immortal.
Eat right, get plenty of sleep.
All right, I'm working on it. Sean, you're last. What are your thoughts?
Well, this endgame has made me realize how multifaceted AI is, or reminded me at least. I kind of got stuck on the whole like singularity type AI. And like another aspect to it that we haven't thought about is the political. Just the geographic location in which this thing is invented or formed or made up will have huge implications. People will be thinking about like, what if it's tainted by or whatever interests might behind it, whether it's corporate or by the government or any interest groups or even the person who made it. Like people won't know that at first, right? And like, what if it was made in North Korea or China or Russia or America? Like all that stuff will have huge political implications as well.
Like, what do we do about where the point is where this rises up? Like, I know what we're trying. Isn't the solution to have it be as open as possible and sort of diverse as possible? So it's not just popping up at one. It's not just Google who invents it and then becomes the most powerful entity ever of all time.
I mean, I think there's a tremendous question about, is it a fast launch where one team makes one AI and suddenly it takes over from everything? Or is it incremental and there are a bunch of different actors? OpenAI is this thing where a bunch of the people in Silicon Valley have given $1 billion to try and create AI that will be completely open source and not corporate profit maximizing, which I think is a really promising idea. There's also a question about whether we want to use sort of antitrust and other tools that we even have now in the law to make sure that not just one company gets to be in charge of all this stuff.
It seems like the most amount of power that anyone will have ever been able to wield, if it is sort of the way I'm imagining it.
I've heard from Psych, he crashed. He's not shunning us.
Is he coming back? Do we need to wait for him, or should we just close this whole thing down?
I think we can close and give him a full report.
Let's close it down, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Just leave it. He's coming back just to an empty room. It's like,
everybody get up on stage. Let's get a group picture. Oh, you made it.
Hey. Sorry, I crashed.
Just in time to go take the picture.
Horrible.
It was really good. We solved everything by the end. We kind of, I think, we
great.
We put the puzzle together.
And he said it's gonna be all